All right, afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Firmus. I am a solution architect for Veeam. I'm in the Global Alliances group. One of my roles is to support partners like SUSE and Mr. Byte.
I'm David Byte, Senior Technology Strategist in the Alliances organization here at SUSE, and I work with guys like Steve.
And today we're going to talk about how we work together. We did the introductions, talked a little bit about Veeam, a little bit about SUSE, a little bit together. Why are we here? Because my boss told me to. We're going to talk about how the two products work together, how we have a pretty good collaborative solution. Talk a little bit of Veeam architecture. Anybody here familiar with Veeam? Heard of Veeam? All right, there we go. We'll talk about how it integrates with SES. And we'll talk about some of the deployments that we're going through the testing. Veeam. So those who've heard about Veeam, I don't know if you've heard about us recently, but a lot of the traffic we've had at the booth is, yep, Veeam, you guys do backups for VMware. What does that have to do with this show? It's like, well, all right. 10 years ago, we did do VMware. We still do it today. We are sort of the de facto standard, so yes, we do. But we also do a whole bunch more. So without going through all the objects, pretty much at the bottom, any data, any app, anywhere, any cloud, we're protected. So pretty much if you throw it at us, we will have a solution for it. Private cloud, public cloud, managed cloud, SaaS, physical, the whole gamut. In order to do that, though, so at the very far left is the backup, right? Obviously, taking the data, making a copy of it, protecting it, restoring it, all that good stuff. Aggregation. How do we do that? That is going through, again, all those multiple clouds, all those different locations, providing you a single view, a single consolidated protection scheme. Visibility. Well, it's great if you can back up and protect everything, but how do you manage it? How do you see what's been done? How do you see what backups are being missed and failed? We provide all those reports, interactive for you and everything else. Orchestration, automation. Veeam is pretty much set and forget, and that's our goal. So as far as the orchestration, we have the ability to back up, virtual to physical, physical to virtual, physical to cloud, virtual to cloud, all vice versa, all the different combinations. In order to do that, it can all be policy driven and automated. So you don't have to go in every day and tweak things and just set and forget. And the automation, again, is part of just schedule it. A lot of artificial intelligence as far as if this backup, especially with our update 4 that came out, we have some things like heat maps where we can actually see if something's not performing well, and we can automatically tweak things on the fly for you. So a little bit of on-the-fly automation of tuning. Anytime I work with any of our alliance partners or any of the field engineers work with any of their customers, we design the solutions based upon this 3-2-1-1 rule. I mean, a lot of people I'm sure have probably heard about the 3-2-1 rule. We've thrown in this last little extra one. Real quick, at least three different copies of your data. 2 of them on different media. We always see the scenario, well, I have one storage array, I'm going to carve 2 volumes. Here's copy 1, here's copy 2. Sure, it may work, but well, you get the idea. One copy definitely should be off-site, right? So you have that site failure. The last one, which is kind of cool, is this offline. Certainly that can be tape, but we're seeing a lot of times now, a lot of customers are doing is they're backing up to, let's say, a dedupe appliance, or they're backing up to a storage array. They'll either power it off or unplug it from the network. So that way it's actually, it's air-gapped. So if any sort of ransomware or anything gets into your environment and starts, messing up your production data, messing up your backup data, could be messing up your second data, your second copy. If it can't get to that, offline copy, you're recoverable. So, the 3-2-1, taking that extra step. Just a graphical illustration of that. Production data go into the backup server, go into your primary copy, and then you can have as many copies as you want. And again, one of them being offsite or offline. In order to achieve that ability to do all those multiple clouds and multiple operating systems and virtual, physical, you need to be flexible, right? You need to be easy to use, easy to manage, and Veeam fits that. Very easy. I mean, almost every Veeam architecture starts with this and just pretty much expands upon it. You have your backup server, which is the brain box, right? That is the command and control, scheduling things, configuration. That's where you go and you set everything up. Then you have your proxy, which is the data mover. That's the facility that actually does the moving of the data from backup to target. Then you have the gateway repository. You can put that on like a dedupe appliance, a storage array. That's the guy that actually manages, hey, what's indexed, what's going where. It's the control from the actual backup point. And then over here, you see our secondary and our offline version. Now, what's great, if you look at all of these three are all SUSE, right? Enterprise storage. Great thing that SUSE provides is that one-stop shopping. So you can have that first tier, which we call the performance tier. That's where you want to do your initial backups. Keep 7 days, 14 days, whatever your requirement is. But you want that to be fast so that you can do, let's say, instant recovery. We'll discuss that a little bit. But the ability to fire up a VM off of the backup. If your target is slow, or let's say even a dedupe appliance or tape, it's not going to work, right? It's just not possible. Secondary copy, again, enterprise storage. This could be spinning disk, where the first one is, let's say, flash. And lastly is what we call the cloud tier or the capacity tier, and that's object storage. So again, that is meant for those, hey, I need to keep 7 years worth of data. No sense keeping that on your SSD drives, right? You can just take that, archive it off to this S3 tier. How this is accomplished, it's through what we call SOBR. My second day at Veeam, they brought me to a partner site, and they were talking about SOBR. I thought they were talking about an after party or something. I had no idea what they were talking about. It's for our scale-out backup repository. And what this is, it's a target. So when we do the backups, we have a repository. That repository can contain what we call extents. Each one of these is an extent, and it's infinitely scalable. There's no limit as far as how many extents and how large they grow. So when you have your typical environment, you have your production data, in this case VMware, goes through that backup proxy to the SOBR. Awesome. Your production environment grows. You add more proxies. Again, that's the horsepower that's backing up the data. At some point, you're going to expand that SOBR. And again, you can continually expand these. Again, this can be a mixture of different storage types. Again, the SSD, the spinning disk, could even be tape. But at some point, you're going to want to look at, again, that primary tier is going to get rather large. You may want to move some of that data off of that. How we do that is through our cloud tier. This came out in January of this year. This is our S3 target. So as long as you're S3 compatible, this will work. Reason for it, again, as I mentioned, is that long-term retention, right? 7 years, 20 years, pick your number. You want to keep it online, but you don't want to have it on your more expensive tier. Cool thing about Veeam, we don't care how many tiers you have. Like we said, the 3-2-1 rule. You could have 20 tiers. We don't care. It's not going to cost you an extra penny for any number of tiers. So some of our competitors do charge you for landings. We don't care. It's just toss it where you want. And no vendor lock-in. So again, that's the great thing about this SOBR is that you can just fill it up with whatever is available. How's it look? Pretty straightforward. As we talked about, you have your bunch of storage targets, throw it in the performance tier, and then we go off to the different capacities. How does this work in a physical diagram? All right. So object storage, you think of an object. Veeam, we think of data blocks. So it's a one-to-one relationship. With Veeam, you have these VBK files. That's your full backup. So if you ever went into a Veeam repository and opened up, let's say, in Windows Explorer or something, you'd see a bunch of VBKs and VIBs. The VBK is the full, VIB is the incremental. So here's, let's say, a week's worth of backups, a full and a bunch of incrementals. Now I do another full. Well, as this keeps growing, you can imagine this slide would get full pretty quick. So you go into Veeam and you just pick your capacity tier, how long I want to keep that data in my performance tier, and where to send it when it goes off. Once we do that, we close the chain. A closed backup chain within Veeam is the full backup in any of the corresponding incrementals. So pretty much whatever you need to have a restore point is that backup chain. So once that backup chain is closed, it's now eligible for archiving off to the capacity tier, cloud tier. When that happens, we take the blocks, move them up to the cloud, into the object storage. And again, move. Then we take the red. The red's the metadata. So we also then send up the metadata as well. Key thing is that allows you at no point is your data inaccessible up in the cloud. or S3 storage. So if anything was to happen to your complete, those first couple tiers, you can still recover the data that's up in the S3, the capacity tier. So as everything's moved, you can see, graphically, all that space was reclaimed. Same thing for the incrementals. And now you can see why I only had 4 incrementals. Now you do another full backup. Another full backup. That guy becomes closed. Assume there's incrementals in there. So what happens now is we're going to do that move. The difference with this is after you do that first move, when you do your second, we now start using our block cloning, which before we move an object up, because the metadata already exists, we can actually compare and say, okay, before I send this block up to the S3 target, is it already up there? If it isn't, we send it. If it is, we just change the pointers in the performance tier. And then again, we send up the metadata right afterwards. So now you're going to do a restore. So if I wanted to restore, let's say that's Monday. So I did my full on Sunday, and now I have my Monday incremental. So somewhere the next week, I want to restore back to that Monday backup. You have to restore the full first, and then restore the incremental. Pretty standard. So what Veeam does is before we go out to that cloud target, the S3 target, first thing we do is we check whatever is in the repository still to see if that block exists. So we don't always, by default, just go out to the cloud and start pulling everything down or to the S3 storage. We actually go out to the existing backup first on that high-performance disk and see if we have it. If it is, we pull it in. And we also check the incrementals as well. At that point, once we've found everything that's still on site or on the high-performance disk, then we go out to the object storage, and then we pull back what's needed. And then your VM is ready to be restored. Update 4 again, which came out in January. Another addition to our portfolio was our plugin for SAP HANA. So, so this plugin is, I'm familiar with the plugins. Plugins with Veeam are the agents that work with whatever application it is, and then allows you to do the backups and restores. So we now have it. It's SAP backend certified, so it's all legit. This allows you to go out and back up your SAP environment, as well as it then utilizes the SOBR Scale-out Repository that we just described. Some features within it, Service Pack 2 uses HANA Studio for restores and Enterprise Plus for Veeam. We can share these with you. That's just there for your reference. Best practices. So with SAP HANA, again, we use the plugin with the backend to restore the database. And then we use our image level snapshots off of the HANA snapshots to give you the application and configuration. So both of these combined will give you that DR for the entire SAP environment. Additionally, within Veeam, we have this instant VM recovery that I mentioned earlier. So if you looked really quick, that VM up there was dead. Had this little red spot on it. What you can do with Veeam is you can immediately go into that virtual machine and fire it up off of the backup. It'll go up, you can use it, you can run it. At some point, if you decide that you want to promote that, we can then migrate that directly into your production environment. So not only do you have the ability to bring the VM up instantly, you then have the ability to keep it and make it the production box. Or you could just keep it running for a period, fix the existing VM, and then copy the new data over, whichever use case works for you. Another feature within Veeam is what we call our SureBackup. SureBackup uses the instant VM recovery, but what it does is it actually puts the VM or VMs into an isolated little cloud or lab within your environment. So in this case, let's say it's you have your first VM as your domain controller, the second one, let's say, is an Oracle server, and the third one's the application server. So you can actually stage those in a particular order, delay them, whatever you need for time for the machines that come up. But at some point, all the machines that you required at application group are now up and running. At that point, we kick off what's called a SureBackup job. that SureBackup job will go out to the virtual lab. It'll check the VMs, make sure that they're consistent, make sure they're up and running. It'll go to the operating system, again, making sure that the operating system is all well, as well as application level, so we can go out and do some scripting, and check to see if the app is running. And then you get a report. So this is great. It's hands-off, it's automated, and it's great for those ad hoc, like if you had an auditor come in and said, hey, you just implemented a new application, how's that, the backups look fine, but how's it going to restore? Instead of having to go to some offsite, DR site, you can actually fire this up in your environment. And again, very easy. You can schedule these to happen once a quarter, once a month, whatever your requirements require. An extension of that is the on-demand sandbox. So the on-demand sandbox is very similar to the SureBackup. It takes the VMs, puts them up into a lab. The difference is you can manipulate this. So these VMs now, you can actually go in. So if you needed to do an application upgrade, if you had some VMs that, let's say, they were corrupted with malware, you could actually fire them up in here, run some tools, extract, and quarantine, clean out those machines, and then restore them back into production. QA, whatever use case is, you can think of it. GDPR, we see a lot where customers go out and they say, I want to check to see and clean everything out. Before they do it in production, they can run their stuff in this lab, verify that everything was kosher, and then go out to the production and run it. It's Dave time.
Thank you, Steve. So I know it seems like there was a lot of marketing kind of stuff going on there, but it's actually really important to make sure that you understand the pieces of the Veeam architecture. And part of the reason for that is they're actually quite important when you go through the Veeam Ready program, because they test it all. They test instant recovery, the backup, the restore times, all of that. So that's why it was important we cover through that. So Veeam allows you to protect SUSE products. So SUSE Linux Enterprise server can be backed up. You can back up machines that are part of a hypervisor. You can back up bare metal machines. It supports file systems that we care about, CephFS, I guess RiserFS if you still have that around, ButterFS. They're all there. Now, what we're all here for is SUSE as a backup repository. So we already have passed this milestone with one configuration, and I'll be honest, it's all SSD that we did first. And people say, well, why'd you do that? Well, quite frankly, it was around Thanksgiving, and I was really pretty busy with supercompute, and we just needed to get it done. So we did it on the hardware we had available, which was an all SSD cluster. I'll talk about a spinning cluster in a minute. And one of the things that we do, like Steve showed you in the architecture slide earlier, we present a lot of options that you can use with Veeam. So the testing lab, the initial work, it was done actually on my personal cluster. It's in Intel West Mirror Lab with IP over IP on QDR and InfiniBand. Consumer grade SSDs, which are a big no-no if you're trying to do something enterprise. We were this close, serious as a heart attack, to passing the certification on that environment. And honestly, what happened was one of my nodes died. So we threw it into the lab in Provo with hardware that we had just then received. So the first validation we talked about, all SSD system, and we have now submitted results from a spinner-based configuration. This has 144 OSDs in it. It's almost a petabyte raw storage in the cluster, 40 gig E, 2690 V3s. It's not the newest hardware, but it's pretty decent hardware, but realistic for what a customer would deploy. So let's talk about those deployment options real quick. So when we look at the Veeam architecture, one of the things you can do as the repository is you can use SUSE Enterprise storage. You present it to a host. Now I'm going to tell you there are reasons to do a virtual host here and reasons to do a physical host. It depends on what your goals are in the environment. The best performance is on physical. And you notice I have ButterFS and XFS both listed here, and there's a reason for that. XFS, that's kind of the gold standard for storing data. ButterFS gives me an option, and I'll talk about that in a second. Now this proxy, this has been the bane of my existence. Learning how to tune the proxy. I have got some best practices now that I would add to the Veeam best practices. We're actually going to submit some of that information up. The key is you put one, if you put one, at least one for every virtual host, and then you do things like use the PV-SCSI, and we'll talk about that. You can really increase the performance those have. They tend to be the bottleneck with SUSE Enterprise Storage. During most of our testing, the back end sitting there at 2, 3, 4, 5% utilization. This host was twiddling its thumbs. The CPUs never got above 4%, and then I started tuning on this, and you could see this is where we were dying performance-wise. So a lot of work happened there. And now that I understand it better, we can really tune. And that's in a single proxy configuration. As you add the proxies, start talking about sober, start talking about just parallelism coming in, you're going to see this start to get busy and your cluster start to get busy as well. The good news is this nearly petabyte-sized cluster I have, you could actually do quite a bit of I/O to it because you could probably back up 100 machines simultaneously and still not even be tweaking the max performance of the cluster. So we've scaled it. You add proxies. You maybe even add more repositories as you go along, right? So you could do it also with CephFS. CephFS, we'll talk here fine. We haven't submitted any Veeam ready results on CephFS yet. I'll be honest with that. Expect that to come soon. I won't do it on my million IOP cluster that I talked about in the last session, but I'll do it on a reasonable cluster someone's actually going to buy. But CephFS has the advantage. You can put proxies in, maybe even more repo servers to help catch the traffic coming in, but you're still going into a single namespace on the back end. So that might be handy if, I don't know, you lose a data center, you lose all this infrastructure, or lose a building in your data center. The repository is actually still there. It's in a subdirectory on CephFS, so you can just discover it from one of the other repository servers, import it, you're done. You're not going to have to copy data, you're not remounting LUNs or RBDs or doing anything weird like that. It's just there. So Steve talked about the S3 stuff. So when we talk about a Veeam architecture, and this is kind of the way I would architect it, I don't know, maybe I'm an old guy, I've been around a while. You have your local, this is kind of a data flow going up the proxy, gets to your local repository. So now you've got your live copy, you've got at least one backup copy in RBD or CephFS repos. And then you can offsite it with the S3 to remote site. So if you're in a 2 data center, 3 data center environment, you could do a round robin using that remote site as S3. S3 is a better protocol for going across the wire. It handles latency better. Veeam's also got some nice magic for doing remote stuff with their agents. So you could even do RBD. And you'll notice this little word dedupe down here. So the reason ButterFS is interesting is I can dedupe it. Lars is ready to kill me now, but this works. I've actually had a...
It's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, so once you get it on the RBD, you format it with ButterFS, right? So you put your data on it, and it's not an inline process. It's async. So it's very easy. You run your backup, and then you run dupe remove, probably in a cron job once a day. And here's the command that I run. It's a 64K that it's deduping at. I tested all the way down to 4K and all the way up to 256. 64 was actually a very prime location for performance versus savings. Going down to 4K only saved me about an extra 4 or 5%, but it 10x'd the time easily, right? So this worked out really well. So I thought I'd show you a little video. It's a little time compressed. We'll see if it actually runs. Yeah, good deal. So this is me maneuvering myself through Veeam. And Steve, you can tell me if I did anything horribly wrong here, but I think I got it mostly right. So I'm testing with a couple of Windows images for this deduplication work. It's actually 4 Windows images, 1 Linux system. The Windows servers, 2 of them have the kernel source tree and X server source trees, and also the Yelp machine learning data sets downloaded to it. So I have a lot of interesting data smattered across them. A couple of the machines had Windows updates applied, a couple did not. So I did some things to really mix the data up, just to see how it worked, see how well the dedupe was actually going to function between all this. So it ran, it came out 400 megabytes a second. It's not too bad, for four systems. And there was still a lot of tuning that happened on the proxy after this. So I will say this is time compressed. You can see the DF, before right here. I also did a butterfs file system df-h just to make sure you're not getting lies told by DF. This is very time compressed. So you'll see the time command at the end. This is what it looks like when it's running. It's going through finding all the extents where the hashes match up, starts going through removing them. And you can see we have a net difference here of 30 gigs, basically. Yeah, so hang on a sec. So this took 52 minutes to run. Here you go. So we started at 112 gigs, ended up at 82. Not too bad, considering I only had 4 VMs, and the data was pretty well scrambled because of the Windows updates. There were significant numbers of updates. I did do a little more testing, so physical versus virtual on the backup times. You can see some differences here. And then the dedupe times. So on a virtual machine, it took 119 minutes. Physical machine, 80 minutes. Then I turned off Spectre, Meltdown, L1TF, which in a virtual machine you definitely would want to do all of those. But it dropped it to 52 minutes. Okay. So you can definitely see where you're going out of user space and the kernel space and back and forth. So with VMware, we're going to talk a little about how you make sure it performs well. You need to know your VMware environment really, really well, and your storage. So what we don't have at SUSE, amazingly enough, is this massive lab of VMware stuff and a massive storage array. I don't have this big Pure Array or 3PAR or anything sitting behind it. So what I did is I ended up taking a couple of servers that had some SSDs, doing a RAID 0 stripe across, presenting it out with LIO up to the VMware host. So LIO, fortunately, supports most of the VAAI stuff. If you're not familiar with VAAI, it has to deal with offloads, things that VMware can tell the array to do. There's things in there like deletes and copies, and one of the most important to know if your array supports is ATS. ATS replaces SCSI reservations. If you don't get the settings right, there is a significant performance penalty. Very significant. So in one of our testing environments, actually back on my very first lab, and it's the reason I showed it here, I was doing some of this work, and the underlying hardware, a Fusion IO board, did not support ATS. So I had to go through and disable ATS, and once I did that, performance nearly tripled on that particular set of instances. Quite fascinating. Maximize the network to the vProxy box. There's a lot of things you can do. If you're running your Veeam proxy on the VMware host, make sure your network configuration is as optimal as possible. So when you're doing a native backup from VMware using a Veeam proxy, what it wants to do is snapshot it and then mount that snapshot to the proxy and then stream it out. Okay? So this is one of the instances where in a network constraint, where you have a network constrained environment, you might want your Linux target to be virtual, because then you can plumb as many networks into it as you can, do a mode 6 bond inside the virtual machine, and let RBD do the work of load balancing across those links with VMware's help. Right? You're getting some amplification of the bandwidth in that case. So some recommendations. How am I doing on time? I don't even know where I am. Okay. Whenever possible, have a good enough network. Use a physical host. You're going to get a much faster experience. This is kind of my notes off of what I've seen. The numbers, obviously, the more backups you're pushing across it, the more deduplication you're doing, the more CPU horsepower you. Give yourself plenty of RAM. Getting under about 16 gigs is a little rough. Go with fast pipes. Make sure you have Veeam proxy on every server. Use PV-SCSI. So when it mounts that VMDK to the vProxy, if you have the default LSI controller, it is significantly slower than the paravirtual SCSI adapter. Shocking, right? I think we all know this at core, but that is an important tuning thing you can make. disabling Windows Defender. Microsoft is trying to help us. They really are. But Windows Defender does bad things when you're doing restores because it does what? Oh yeah, on-demand scanning. So it makes everything run slower. So a few specifics, SLAS 12 SP3, SUSE Enterprise Storage 5.5, Veeam Backup and Recovery 9.5. Now, the virtual proxy, or the virtual SLAS target when we used it is actually SLAS 12 SP4. It didn't make any difference in this role, honestly. And when we look at where we are from a Veeam ready status, this is the grueling test that Veeam puts us through to be considered in their HCL. Like I said, we have one in there today. All SSD configuration using RBD, XFS on top. This is the link to it. Used a 100 gig network, which is quite immaterial in the grand scheme of things, so don't let that throw you. The work in progress. There is active work going on around the S3 today. Steve and I talked about it just yesterday, actually. The 7.2 case database has been submitted. We have passed all of the numbers from our perspective. Veeam is checking the documents. I expect any day that, I was actually looking at my email right before to see if we made it, any day this will be added to the HCL at Veeam, which is a wonderful thing because people, you know, we talk to the guys in the field all the time, right? And everyone's like, well, it's all SSD. I know, I'm sorry, we'll get there. So this one's here. It'll be there soon enough. And we'll update the paper that we have on the SUSE side. So I have an integration paper. It talks about a lot of stuff. I want to be updating with more lessons learned from the recent Veeam work. We'll update it with information about the spinners. That's quite important. I will say Veeam has got a very good website. There's a lot of documentation on their site. There is a set of forums where if you're having an issue, you can go out and read and see where people are coming, you know, what they're saying about certain pieces, how they perform. Found them quite helpful in some of the work I was doing. And then SUSE Enterprise Storage. I am hammering this home because so many people don't know where to find the information on the SUSE website. You go to products, you go to SUSE.com, go to products, software defined storage, and then click where it says SUSE Enterprise Storage, not the little box that's right below it. You click the actual word SUSE Enterprise Storage, and then there's this wonderful link that says Reference Architectures. And under Reference Architectures, you will scroll down. There's a software section, and in the software section is Veeam. It actually points back to the Veeam knowledge base where the HCL is. The article there, it has our paper there as well. So there's quite a bit of work that's gone on. There's still some more ongoing. We hope to complete the S3 stuff soon. It's waiting for me to help Alex, our integration engineer, when I get back home on Monday, and we'll see how it goes. So in the end, I think SUSE and Veeam together have a pretty great story. You know, like Steve said, we can have one cluster. That one cluster can provide your high-performance pool. It could be on flash. Once we have the ready repository for spinners, it could be on spinners. You could, you know, you could put it on slower spinners. Although I don't know that anyone buys anything except 7.2K. You can put it on S3. We support it all. It's there, it's easy to use, and it's one point of administration for the entire backup architecture. So that's kind of it from my side. Do you have any last comments, Steve?
The only thing is, on the Veeam Ready, when he showed the knowledge base link, that's where you'll find all of those, you know, cool little notes and performance tuning. So exactly. So when you go there, and actually the one I think it was previous when you actually showed the link for your KV, exactly.
Yep.
So when you go there, you go to the Veeam Ready list. You see you click on that document. That's where anything that, you know, SUSE has done in their labs to tweak. As he said, a lot of the stuff that he was talking about are definitely specific to their integration. That's where you'd find it. So not only will you find, you know, what is, you know, been tested in Veeam Ready, you'll also find the ability, you know, to what needs to be tweaked for that particular storage. So it's very powerful. And you mentioned the forums. The forums are the key communication with Veeam as far as those. You put stuff out there, those are managed even by our chief technologists. So like the top folks at Veeam monitor and will respond to those. So like Gustav, anybody knows Gustav, he's like our head, you know, engineer. You'll get responses, you know, out there from him as far as, and also there's spaces if you have any questions as far as or requests for, you know, feature enhancements, that's a great place to post them as well. So
Excellent. Any questions? Mishko.
Sure. So the question was about Veeam Ready. Excuse me. So Veeam Ready, isn't a certification. It's more of a, we have particular benchmarks for, like you said, that instant VM recovery, the data labs. There are certain things that we have to, we've seen that if it doesn't meet certain benchmarks, it doesn't perform well in the environment. So it's not a support or not support. I mean, you could install today with the spinners and with the, ButterFS stuff, right? It's absolutely, it's just, it's not something that we've tested, and you wouldn't. So if you go out to Veeam Ready, you can be pretty confident that if you implement it, especially with the best practices that the vendors have provided, you will see the results that you expect. Otherwise, we can't really be sure what is going to happen. So.
But the key is you will still do your best to support it, right?
Well, absolutely. Whether or not you're on this is really just a, there's 100 solutions out there. If they're on this list, it's been tested rigorously. I mean, he's not kidding. It's not a fun project to go through. There's, like I said, he submitted it weeks ago. I looked at the numbers. The numbers match. He's good. What we do is our engineers go through the logs and they check stuff I don't even want to go into. Nor do I understand. Making sure that they don't cheat or do anything funky. Yeah, exactly. So, like when their first test, when it was all SSDs, in their knowledge base, it was flagged. This configuration was all SSD, right? Because we don't want someone seeing that this storage was, Veeam Ready, and then use it on spinners and not get the same result and be like, hey, what's going on? So, it's a really rigorous process. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for attending. I hope this was helpful and useful.
Swing by the booth and get a yo-yo.
Yes, lots of yo-yos.